Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story and it starts like this. I never thought I'd have to prove I owned my own house, but here we are. This whole mess started last summer when I inherited my grandmother's beach cottage in a small coastal town in Maine. It's a gorgeous little place. Nothing fancy, just a cozy two-bedroom cottage with weathered cedar shingles and white trim, sitting right on a private beach. My grandmother bought it back in 1962 for practically nothing, and it's been in our family ever since. I grew up spending every summer there with Gran, collecting seashells and building sandcastles. After she passed away last year at 92, she left the cottage to me in her will. I was beyond grateful. At 35, I could never afford waterfront property on my teacher's salary. The cottage needed some work, but it was mine free and clear. What I didn't know was that while Gran's cottage had sat mostly empty these past few years as her health declined, a fancy new development called the Tides at Ocean View had sprung up next door. We're talking massive McMansions with 3-car garages and infinity pools, totally out of character with the old beach cottages that used to line this stretch of coast. And of course, they had an homeowner association run by the most entitled people you could imagine. The trouble started Memorial Day weekend. I'd taken a few days off school to come up and start cleaning out the cottage. It needed a good scrubbing after sitting empty, plus I wanted to sort through Gran's things and figure out what repairs were needed before summer. I'd gotten there Friday evening and spent Saturday morning clearing cobwebs and airing the place out. I was on the deck having lunch when this woman in pressed khakis and a polo shirt with some kind of logo marched up my front steps like she owned the place. Without so much as a hello, she demanded, "Excuse me, what are you doing here? This is private property." I nearly choked on my sandwich. Yes, I know. It's my property." She gave me the most condescending look I've ever seen. "I'm Sandra Mitchell, president of the Tides at Ocean View Homeowners Association. This cottage is part of our development and I know for a fact it's been vacant. You need to leave immediately or I'll call the police." I tried to stay calm. There must be some mistake. This cottage belonged to my grandmother, Margaret Sullivan. She passed away last year and left it to me. I have all the paperwork if you'd like to see it. "That's impossible," Sandra snapped. "All properties in this area were purchased by our developers 5 years ago. You're trespassing and I won't ask again." I went inside to grab the deed and other documents, but when I came back out, Sandra was on her phone. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up, along with a guy in a suit who introduced himself as Richard Wagner, the homeowner association's attorney. "Officers, this woman has broken into one of our vacant properties," Sandra announced. "We'd like her removed and charged with trespassing." The older cop, Officer Matthews according to his nameplate, turned to me. "Ma'am, can you explain what's going on here?" I handed him my driver's license and the deed. "This is my property. I inherited it from my grandmother last year. I have the deed right here, plus her will and the probate documents. I'm happy to show you everything." While Officer Matthews reviewed the paperwork, Sandra and Richard huddled together whispering frantically. I could see them getting more agitated as the officer nodded and handed my documents back. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "Ms. Sullivan clearly owns this property. And ma'am," he turned to Sandra, "this cottage isn't part of your development. It's a separate parcel that predates your community by decades." Sandra's face turned an impressive shade of red. "That's impossible. Our developers assured us they owned everything on this beach. Richard, do something." Richard was already furiously scrolling through his phone. "There seems to be some confusion. Our records show." "Your records are wrong," I interrupted. "This cottage has been in my family since 1962. I have tax records, utility bills, everything. You can check with the town. We're not part of your homeowner association and never have been." Officer Matthews stepped between us. "Ladies, this is clearly a civil matter. Ms. Sullivan has provided valid proof of ownership. Unless you have documentation showing otherwise, she has every right to be here." Sandra wasn't about to give up that easily. "This is outrageous. That shabby little shack is bringing down our property values. It doesn't meet any of our architectural standards or maintenance requirements. Just look at those peeling shingles." I'd had enough. Those shabby shingles are original cedar from 1962, and they're supposed to weather naturally. Not everything needs to look like a plastic surgery clinic like your McMansions. "How dare you!" Sandra gasped. "Richard, we need to take action. Can we file an injunction?" Richard looked uncomfortable. "Sandra, I've just checked the property records on my phone. She's right. This parcel was never part of the development. It's completely separate and predates our homeowner association by over 50 years. We have no jurisdiction here." "But the developers said." "The developers were wrong," Richard cut her off. "Or they misled you. Either way, We can't enforce our regulations on property we don't control. Officer Matthews cleared his throat. If there's nothing else, we'll be heading out. Ma'am, he nodded to me, enjoy your property. Call us if you have any more trouble. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the harassment was constant. Every time I came up to work on the cottage, Sandra or other homeowner association board members would find some reason to complain. They called the police 3 more times claiming various violations. Noise complaints when I was pressure washing the deck, accusations that I was running an illegal vacation rental when my sister visited, even reporting suspicious activity when I was sitting on my own beach reading a book. The police stopped responding after the 3rd false call, but the homeowner association wasn't done. They started sending official-looking violation notices, threatening fines for everything from unapproved exterior paint colors to unauthorized landscaping. I kept every letter in a file and ignored them all. Then they got sneaky. One morning in June, I arrived to find a crew from Ocean View Landscaping on my property, cutting down the beach roses and bayberry bushes that had grown wild along my dunes for decades. "Stop!" I yelled, running from my car. "What are you doing? This is private property." The crew foreman showed me a work order. Homeowner Association contracted us to remove unauthorized vegetation and install approved landscaping. "We're just following orders." I called the police immediately. This time, Officer Matthews brought his supervisor, Sergeant Rodriguez. They ordered the crew off my property and took statements from everyone. "This is criminal trespass and vandalism," Sergeant Rodriguez told me. "Would you like to press charges?" "Absolutely." The landscaping company's foreman was furious when he realized he'd been misled. Turned out Sandra had given them a contract claiming all beachfront property was homeowner association controlled. He was happy to provide copies of everything, including texts from Sandra specifically instructing them to clean up that eyesore cottage whether they like it or not. I hired an attorney, Maria Delgado, who specialized in property disputes. She was outraged when I showed her my documentation of the harassment. "This is textbook bad faith behavior," she said. "They knew they had no authority over your property but proceeded to harass you and damage your land anyway. We're going to shut this down hard." Maria sent a cease and desist letter to the Homeowner Association Board and their attorney. She also helped me file for a restraining order against Sandra personally. But the real hammer dropped when we sued both the Homeowner Association and Sandra individually for harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and abusive process. The Homeowner Association's insurance company nearly had a heart attack when they saw our evidence. The texts about the landscaping crew were particularly damaging, clear proof they knew they were trespassing and damaging property they had no right to touch. The insurance company's lawyers immediately pushed for mediation. That's when we discovered the whole story. The developers had indeed told the Homeowner Association they controlled all beachfront property, but they knew that wasn't true. They'd tried to buy Grand's cottage multiple times over the years, offering increasingly large sums, but she always refused. Rather than admit this to their buyers, they just pretended the holdout property didn't exist. Sandra and the other board members had bought massive homes believing they were getting private beach access, only to discover they had to share the beach with my shabby little shack. Instead of accepting reality, they tried to bully me into submission. The settlement negotiations were intense. Maria was brilliant, methodically laying out every instance of harassment, every false police report, every attempt to enforce non-existent authority over my property. The Homeowner Association's insurance company knew they were in trouble. In the end, we settled for $175,000 in damages, plus they had to pay for complete restoration of my landscaping with mature native plants, and all my legal fees. The Homeowner Association also had to send a formal written apology to both me and the police department for wasting law enforcement resources with false reports. Sandra was forced to resign from the board and was personally banned from coming within 100 feet of my property. But the best part? The settlement required the Homeowner Association to install permanent property line markers and put up signs clearly stating, "End of Homeowner Association property, private residence," to prevent any future confusion. They also had to include a prominent disclaimer in their Homeowner Association documents explicitly stating that my cottage was not part of their development and they had no authority over it. I used part of the settlement money to restore the cottage properly, keeping its original character but fixing what needed fixing. The cedar shingles were carefully restored, not replaced. The beach roses and bayberry bushes were replanted with mature specimens. I even added some traditional Cape Cod-style gardens with hydrangeas and Rosa rugosa that Gran would have loved. The rest of the money went into a maintenance fund for the cottage's future upkeep. I wanted to make sure it would always stay in the family, just as Gran had intended. The new Homeowner Association board, chastened by the lawsuit, has been remarkably polite. They even invited me to their annual beach cleanup day, while carefully noting that my participation would be entirely voluntary since I wasn't a member. I declined, but I do my own beach cleanup regularly. Gran taught me to be a good neighbor, even when others aren't. Sandra moved away a few months later, selling her McMansion at a loss. Apparently, she couldn't handle looking at my shabby little shack anymore. A replacement on the board, a retired judge named Bill, is much more reasonable. He actually stopped by one day to admire the cottage. "You know," he said, "these old places have character you just can't buy. Your grandmother was wise to hold on to it." The other neighbors have gradually come around too. Some even admitted they preferred having one original cottage on the beach. It adds charm and history to the area. A few have asked for advice about planting native species in their own yards after seeing how beautiful my restored dune garden turned out. Last week, I was sitting on the deck watching the sunset when Officer Matthews walked by on beach patrol. "Evening, Ms. Sullivan," he called out. "Any homeowner association troubles today?" I laughed and waved. "Not anymore. Would you like some lemonade? Gran's recipe." He joined me on the deck, and we chatted about how things had changed. "You know," he said, "in all my years on the force, I've never seen someone handle harassment with such grace. Most people would have lost their temper long ago." "Gran always said the best revenge is living well," I replied, "though the lawsuit helped too." He chuckled. "That it did. You taught them all a valuable lesson about property rights and common decency." Looking out at the ocean, I felt grateful for everything: the cottage, the victory over the homeowner association, but mostly for Gran's wisdom in knowing this place was worth protecting. The waves still sound exactly the same as when I was a little girl building sandcastles here. Some things shouldn't change. I've started inviting my students up for educational field trips about coastal ecology and local history. They love learning about the native plants and marine life, and I love seeing their excitement when they spot their first horseshoe crab or find an intact sand dollar. The cottage has become more than just a summer home. It's a place where new generations can learn to appreciate the simple beauty of an unspoiled beach. The developers are building Phase 3 of the Tides at Ocean View now, even bigger houses with even more elaborate landscaping. But my little cedar shingled cottage stands firm, a reminder that bigger isn't always better and that sometimes the best thing you can do is preserve what matters. Last month, I found Gran's old diary while cleaning out the attic. In an entry from 1985, she wrote about turning down the first developer who tried to buy the cottage. "They offered enough money to set me up for life, but some things are worth more than money. This cottage holds our family's memories, and the beach belongs to nature first. My granddaughter will understand someday." She was right. I do understand. And thanks to her stubbornness and my willingness to fight for what's right, this little piece of old Maine will stay just as it is for generations to come. The homeowner association's fancy houses may tower over us, but my shabby little shack has something they'll never have: a soul. And thanks to one very entitled homeowner association president's overreach, it now also has an ironclad legal precedent protecting it from future harassment. Sometimes I sit on the beach at sunset, just like Gran used to do, and smile thinking about how she would have handled Sandra and her homeowner association minions. She probably would have invited them in for tea and quietly demolished their arguments with her particular blend of steel and grace. I'd like to think I did her proud by standing my ground while staying true to her values. The cottage needs constant care. Salt air is hard on buildings, but it's worth every minute of work. Every spring when I open it up for the season, I thank Gran for this incredible gift. Not just the property itself, but the lesson that some things are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to protect it for the future. As for Sandra and her homeowner association dreams of total beach dominance, well, they learned the hard way that money can't buy everything, and that even a shabby little shack can have a mighty strong foundation when it's built on family, history, and the law. Update: a year after the homeowner association drama, they tried one last power play, but it backfired spectacularly. It's been just over a year since my battle with the homeowner association, and I thought I should share what's happened since then. While things have mostly calmed down, there was one final attempt at a power grab that ended up making my position even stronger. About 3 months ago, I received notice that the developers of the Tides at Ocean View were seeking to modify the coastal zoning regulations. They wanted to establish what they called a unified architectural standard for all beachfront properties in our area. Reading between the lines, it was clearly an attempt to force my cottage to conform to their aesthetic preferences through municipal regulations since they couldn't do it through the homeowner association. I immediately called Maria, my attorney from the previous case. She wasn't surprised. "This is a common tactic," she explained. "When homeowner associations can't control neighboring properties directly, they sometimes try to use local government as a backdoor. But they've made a serious mistake here. Turns out my grandmother had done more than just keep the cottage in the family. Back in 1978, she'd worked with a local conservation group to have the cottage designated as a historic coastal structure by the State Historical Commission. I had no idea. The documentation was in with a bunch of old papers I hadn't gotten around to sorting yet. Maria was thrilled when I found the designation paperwork. "This is perfect. They can't force architectural changes on a historically designated property. Plus, the timing of this zoning modification attempt could be seen as retaliation for winning the previous lawsuit." We decided to attend the town planning board meeting where they'd be discussing the proposed changes. I expected to see the developers and maybe some homeowner association board members, but I was shocked when Sandra walked in with them. Apparently, she hadn't moved away after all. She'd just been lying low while working with the developers on this new scheme. The developers presented first, showing slick renderings of how they wanted all beachfront properties to look, basically, like smaller versions of their McMansions. They talked about property values and community cohesion. Then Sandra got up to speak. "As a former resident, I can tell you that having non-conforming structures like that old cottage drastically impacts the marketability of our luxury homes. No one wanting to spend millions on an oceanfront property wants to look at weathered shingles and overgrown vegetation." When it was my turn, I presented the historical designation documents. Maria explained the legal protections they provided and pointed out how the proposed changes appeared to target my property specifically, which could violate various laws against discriminatory zoning. But the real surprise came from other residents. Bill, the retired judge who replaced Sandra on the homeowner association board, spoke in my favor. "I've served on many boards and courts over my career," he said. "This proposed change is nothing but an attempt to use municipal power to harass a property owner who already won a legal battle fair and square. It's an abuse of the zoning process." Then other neighbors started speaking up. A marine biologist who'd moved in next door talked about how my natural dune vegetation helped prevent beach erosion. A local real estate agent testified that having historic properties actually increased area property values by creating character and charm. The planning board voted unanimously to reject the proposed changes. But they didn't stop there. The chairman, clearly annoyed by the developers' tactics, directed the town's legal department to review all of the tides at Ocean View's permits and approvals to ensure full compliance with coastal conservation requirements. That review opened a massive can of worms for the developers. Turns out they'd forgotten to perform several required environmental impact studies before building their last phase of homes. They'd also exceeded height restrictions on 3 houses and failed to implement promised public beach access paths. The town hit them with substantial fines and ordered them to modify the non-compliant structures. They also had to create a proper dune protection plan. And guess what? The plan their consultants developed basically copied what I already had on my property with the beach roses and bayberry bushes. Sandra tried to corner me after the meeting, claiming she'd sue me personally for interfering with development, but Maria shut that down fast. "Would you like to add witness intimidation to your previous documented harassment?" Maria asked her loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Because I'd be happy to add that to the restraining order." Sandra stormed off, but I later heard through neighborhood gossip that the developers had banned her from their offices. Apparently, they blamed her big mouth and obvious vendetta against me for attracting unwanted attention to their permit issues. The fallout continued over the next few months. The developers had to delay their Phase 3 construction to comply with environmental regulations they'd previously ignored. Several potential buyers backed out when they learned about the property's history of homeowner association overreach and legal troubles. The next one is entitled People's Story. I went into a pawn shop. With the intention of just looking, I found a set of drums that they had stacked up in a corner for sale. I asked the clerk how much they wanted for them. She was more interested in her phone. She barely acknowledged me and said, "Look at the tag on top." There was a single tag on the snare drum on top that read, $250 goes with the green drums. The drums I'm speaking of are green. Now, I knew this was a great deal. Frankly, the deal of a lifetime. So I asked, "Ma'am, are you sure?" She kind of barked back and said, "That's the price. Do you want it or not?" I mentioned how great of a deal it was, and her only response was, "Great." I paid for it, took my receipt, loaded it up and left. She was probably the rudest salesperson I'd ever met, but whatever. Tonight I get a call from the owner. I don't know how they got my number, but my best guess is from my card, or from maybe something I had pawned years ago. But he was extremely insistent that I was in the wrong. He said, "You need to bring that back. You knew they were worth more. You knew it and you let her go with it. That was the price for just that one drum." This is true. I knew it was a stellar deal. I, however, did not try to do anything dishonest. I asked twice. She insisted on it, and even got me a platform cart so I could load them. I figured they were taking up a lot of space and maybe just wanted them gone. The snare drum even said, "Goes with the green drums." I wasn't trying to be dishonest. The receipt says, description, green drum set. The owner now says he intends to call the police, and possibly sue me, and I really don't want any trouble. I also don't want to return it because I genuinely feel like I didn't do anything wrong. The owner has called me about 50 times, and I finally blocked the number. It's been making me extremely anxious. The drums value new is around $2,000. Should I return them? Should I get an attorney? Update. After a slow of angry texts from about 3 different numbers, I believe he's starting to see my side of things. It's not a normal small paper receipt, it's a paid invoice on printer paper. It lists the make, model, color, quantity, 6, and the individual serial numbers for each drum. It has the barcode, which she scanned and printed. The price came up as $250 plus VA sales taxes. It shows my payment method, and my name and number I had listed with them, plus an old address. It also has the clerk's name. They have a few shops in the area. Apparently I had purchased a firearm at one of their shops at one time, because digging through my credit card statement using a search bar shows what I assume I paid for that firearm some time ago. I simply texted him a photo of the receipt, and told him that I double-checked that the $250 was all she wanted for the drums. I reiterated by telling him that I even asked her to check her system because I was indeed interested in the drums. The owner apologized for going off on an angry tirade over a screw-up by one of his employees and that the employee made it out to be something that it wasn't because he was able to pull footage and audio of the incident and the transaction. My assumption is that she tried to lie or say I swindled her in some way to obtain the drums, in order to cover herself. I really wasn't trying to screw anyone over. I drove the hour home with the drums and set them up, feeling elated that I finally got something I'd been wanting, at a godsend price. He told me that he understood that I wouldn't be returning them, and that he'd chalk it up to a trainable moment. It's still super weird to get a barrage of texts and calls essentially calling me a thief and a crook, when it seems like it would be easier to first get the full story, knowing you had footage and audio of the incident the entire time. I have a close friend that lives a few hours north of me that manages a competing pawn shop to this one. Apparently this one is a chain. I showed him everything, and he just kind of laughed at it. He said they keep serial numbers of every single item in case something DOS pop is stolen, and they have to wait a certain amount of time before they can sell it, to give the item time to come up on a hot sheet. This explains the release date that the drums were well past. He also told me that the broker was Saul, and that his shop would have rather eaten the mistake than embarrassed themselves by seeking out a customer that got an item for cheaper than they intended. He said it didn't matter if he thinks I knew better, and that it's not my job to know. It shows in the system as that price and that's what I paid. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.